Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another special interview episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This week, we are going to welcome onto the show a great saxophonist and educator, Steve Neff. Steve is such a great guy, and I've learned so much from him over the years, checking out his YouTube videos and checking out his website. He's also very active on the Sax on the Web forum, which is an important resource for saxophonists to join other like-minded individuals. So if you're a saxophone player and you haven't checked that out, definitely go and see what that website has to offer. And you will see Steve all over the place chiming in on a lot of discussions, and he always just has really great stuff to say. And great insights to give on playing the saxophone, playing jazz, and education in general. You can check out Steve's website at neffmusic.com. He's got all kinds of fantastic stuff there. He's got a lot of ebooks, some online courses. You can sign up for some Skype lessons with him. It's just a great place to be and see what's going on in his world and learn a ton, which I know all of you guys out there are really into. So definitely go and check that out today. And without further ado, here is my interview with Steve Neff. Pleased to welcome onto the podcast today, Steve Neff. Steve, thanks so much for coming on and joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. You're welcome.
So let's jump right in. Can you tell me a little bit about like your background, sort of your origin story? How did you get involved in music and choose to make a life out of it?
Well, I guess it's your average story. I started in seventh grade playing the sax, and I remember in seventh grade hearing the ninth grade jazz band and hearing an alto player improvise this solo, and it just blew my mind. I thought he was reading it, and he just improvised. I found out he was improvising, and he bent this high D on alto. And I remember in seventh grade just looking at it, and it had so much emotion and feeling. And I had just started, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to do that, you know?
That's awesome.
So I just started practicing the tar out of the sax, and it just became my passion, you know? And so I played all the way through high school, took lessons, and started, as most players do, you start winning all county and state auditions and all that stuff. And you, I don't know, you start realizing, hey, I'm getting pretty good at this. Mm-hmm. And so I went to Ithaca College for music. I wanted to go for performance, but my dad was pretty rough. He's like, I'm not helping you with college if you go for music performance. That's a waste of money. You have to go for at least music education. So I started for music education at Ithaca, and then these guys came into town into Ithaca. We were I had a little band that I was in that would do like little jazz gigs and stuff in Ithaca, and these guys came into town from the Boston area, and this tenor player, I for the life of me I don't know his name, but he just blew me away. He sat in with our band. And I remember we played all blues, and he just played this solo. My jaw was just wide open. I was looking at this guy like, what the heck is he playing? Like, it just blew my mind, you know? And at that point, I'm like, I got to see what's going on in Boston. And luckily, I had a girlfriend who was going to Berkeley. Mm-hmm. You know, I had started dating her in high school. So I came out in the summer to visit her. And she took me to the Performance Center at Berkeley, and it just so happened that who was playing that for that concert was Donnie McCaslin.
Oh wow!
And Warren Hill together.
Wow!
And they were like just a year or two older than me, and this concert was just smoking. It just blew my mind, and right there I was like, I got to come here. I got to transfer here from Ithaca. Like, they don't have this in Ithaca. Like, at Ithaca, I was like the lead alto player. Mm-hmm. Like, mm-hmm. I didn't want to be it felt good to be the lead alto player, but in a way I didn't want to be the lead alto player. I wanted to be around these other guys that I would look at and just go, getting stuff to learn and all that. Right. So I transferred to Berkeley and then went there for a couple years, never graduated, which my dad still gives me a hard time about. I got a gig at Berkeley. You know, it was a GB gig, like a
Mhm.
function band. But one of my professors is like, "You want to play in my band?" And I'm like, "Are you serious? I'll get paid for this?" You know,
That's incredible.
I was psyched, and I told my dad, I'm like, I'm gonna take a semester off and just practice, and I ended up never going back. So,
Interesting. What was that? What was the transition like going from Ithaca to, like you said, kind of big fish, small pond to Berkeley, where there's just these incredible, almost like otherworldly players everywhere you go? Was it a smooth
oh,
transition, or was it? How was it for you?
it was smooth for me. I mean, I was just in heaven.
Yeah.
I mean, Donnie had, I think, just left the year I came there,
Hmm.
and but then there was other guys there. Seamus Blake was there. Mark Turner was there. Um, it, uh, I'm spacing now, but there was
Yeah,
like
it's
a
okay.
whole
It
bunch
sounds
of,
incredible.
yeah, it was like the mid 80s, and there were so many people there that like my age,
Hmm.
and I was just, I loved it. For me, I never wanted to be like, I don't know. For me, I never wanted to be the best sax player in the world. I just wanted to be as good as I could be.
Hmm.
So for me to be able to go to a recital and hear some of these guys, I was like eating it up. I'm like, oh, I got to practice that, and I got to
Right.
learn that, and I got, you know what I mean? So I was in heaven.
Well, that's great, man. So then I know that you live in Vermont now. So I
Yeah.
guess my next question would be like, what do you enjoy? Because I think a lot of the listeners of this podcast are not close to a major city where there's a lot of jazz going on, like a New York or a Boston or something like that. How do you stay motivated, like not being able to go out and see this kind of stuff every night? What keeps you going, keeps you improving on saxophone and in music?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, for me, it's I've always been kind of self motivated.
Yeah.
I'm not really an extrovert. Like I can act like an extrovert,
Mm-hmm.
and some people think I'm an extrovert because if I get in a crowd, I'm like, hey, how's it going? And
Right,
I
right.
act that way, but inside I'm not. So I've always been like this guy who does really well with like being in a room
Mm-hmm.
and going, how can I be motivated today? So, you know, for me, I mean, I have thousands of recordings. I'm always checking out young guys. I'm always checking out Facebook and
Mm-hmm.
YouTube. And I mean, if I hear a young guy, you know, 18 and he's playing rhythm changes and it blows my mind, that like excites me. I'm like, I got to transcribe this, you
Right,
know,
right.
I got to figure out what he's doing. And um, I don't know. For me, it's always the process of continuing growth. I guess that's always satisfied me if I'm growing.
Cool.
Like my wife told me the other day, she's sometimes gets frustrated with me because I'm not motivated by money.
Mm-hmm.
Like some people are really motivated by money. Like, um, but when I started the website, when I make decisions about the website, I hardly ever think about money. It's just about that's kind of a side thing.
Right.
The main the main thing is just doing this thing that I love and like what can I do next, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I don't know. For me, there's so much online that I didn't have when I was a kid. I think if all this stuff I had when I was a kid, I think my brain would have exploded. You know?
Right, exactly. I know it is pretty intense, and you can watch stuff from all over the world. I was talking to somebody yesterday about the Smalls website. Do you know about that?
Oh yeah,
Where
yeah. I have
they
a
stream
subscription to
all their
that.
shows. It's unbelievable. Talk about inspiration. You can sit at your house and watch all these amazing musicians in New York, you know?
Oh yeah, I got a subscription to that just so I could get a bunch of the recordings of Danny Walsh playing.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
He's a New York guy I love, and
Hmm.
so I transcribed some of the solos from that, and I'm just like, it's cool. You're like in a New York jazz club, but at home
It's
in
pretty
Vermont.
awesome. So, where did you get the idea for the website? So, if you guys don't know and you haven't checked out Steve, he has this fantastic website that's just, I mean, you could be on it for days going through your lessons and all your books and everything like that. How did that come about? How did you decide to start sort of distributing your material online?
Well, it was like I think it was 2005. And everyone back then was like, you need a website, you need a
Right.
website. And I kind of had my brother-in-law help me put up a website. But it was like a static website that he's the only one that understood,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't change anything on it. It was a pain to update. If I had to update it, I had to email him and then wait 3 months for
Oh
him to
man.
have time to. Yeah, it was just a pain. So I told him, like, look, this isn't working. Like, if I can't update it, it's no use to me. Like,
Right.
it's got to be current. So I'm like, what can I do? So he set up this other website for me on Joomla, it was called, and he set that up, and then that was pretty awesome. Like, I could just go on and figure out how to do stuff and add plugins. But after I did that, the whole I didn't really have a vision for the website. It was just kind of like, I don't know, just a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I got this Barone. I think it's the first review on my site, but it was a Barone. It was a refaced Barone mouthpiece.
Okay.
And I was on Sax on the Web, and I don't know, how you chat on there. I was
Mm-hmm.
just like, hey, this Barone mouthpiece is pretty cool, and people were like, hey, can you do a clip
Mm.
so we can hear it? And so I had this little portable recorder, nothing special, and I recorded a clip of it, and I'm like, and I put it on Sax on the Web, and I just got a lot of positive feedback. Like, people were like, "Wow, that sounds awesome! You sound great on that." And besides that, I got a bunch of emails, like enough that it piqued my curiosity. Like, hey, Steve, what were you playing? Like, what were you playing at the 3 minute mark on that thing, or what were you playing here? And can you do like a short, maybe recording or maybe teaching what you were doing there? And I was a nice guy. I was trying to be nice. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. So I recorded a little lesson, and I talked about what I'd been playing there, and I put that on Sax on the Web, and then I got even more positive feedback. Man, that lesson was awesome. You should do more of these. And that's when it clicked. I'm like, well, I wonder if I can make money doing this.
Yeah.
Like, maybe
Right.
I can record these lessons and put them on my site. And so that's kind of how it started. And then that's also how the mouthpiece reviews started, because it snowballed after that. It was just ridiculous.
Cool.
Like, I mean, I've always yes, I mean a lot of sax players aren't into the whole, well, yeah, a lot of sax players are into the whole mouthpiece thing,
Yeah.
but I don't know, for me, I had a background where I had a couple of things happen where a mouthpiece made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember playing this Rousseau or Caravan mouthpiece in high school, listening to Dave Sanborn albums and trying to sound like Dave Sanborn on a
Mm-hmm.
Caravan classical mouthpiece. It wasn't working. And I just remember at some point I got like Claude Lakey,
Mm-hmm.
and I was wildly out of tune on it. But when I played it, all of a sudden the doors open, and I'm like, oh, I can get a Sanborn sound on this. It just made a huge difference. And then on tenor, I had a Brillhart Level Air, and I was into Brecker so much, like late 80s,
Mm-hmm.
early 90s, and I'm trying to sound like Brecker, but for whatever reason, I could not get rid of that Brillhart Level Air sound. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
had a certain sound that it just wasn't. I felt like it was a wall between me and that Brecker sound. And I somehow, from Jerry Bergonzi, I bought a Sugal. I think it was the JB model,
Mm-hmm.
and I just went home with it and played it. I don't know. Immediately, I was like, "That's the sound. That's
Cool.
Brecker." Like, it got me so far closer to Brecker, and I think those two things happening. That's why I get passionate about mouthpieces. Like, I just saw like some doors open for
Yeah.
me with these two things.
But you said something very interesting because a lot of the stuff that we talk about on this podcast is like emulating other players, right? And that's such a
Yeah.
huge part of everybody's development. So, through you talking about some of the equipment, it's interesting to hear. But after you mentioned every piece of equipment, you also mentioned one of the players that you were trying to emulate, trying to sound like. So how
Yeah.
important is that for you? Like how big were those recordings in your life and just trying to sound like your favorite players? Was that a big part of your development?
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah.
huge. I mean, yeah, I mean that was the main thing. I mean, in high school, before I even knew chords and scales and all that, I mean, I was learning those things slowly,
Hmm.
but I had the Dave Sanborn album Voyeur. I don't know if you
Yep,
know that one.
absolutely.
That was like mid 80s, but that album blew my mind. I'm just like, how can an alto sax sound like this?
Hmm.
Like before that, all I had was some Spyro Gyra albums, and I don't know, they were kind of nice, but I wasn't that into them.
Right,
And
right.
but when I got Voyeur, I'm like, that's what I want to sound like. And the same thing with Brecker. I mean, I first heard of him in college. I was at Ithaca College. I was an alto player. I didn't. I listened to a few tenor players, but it was mostly alto. And
Hmm.
I was at a party, and this crazy tenor solo came on. They were playing, and I was like, "Who's this?" And everyone in the party, it seemed like everyone looked at me like, "What? Who's this?" It's Brecker. And I'm like, "Who?" And they're like, "Michael Brecker, dude." And I'm like, "I've never heard of him." And it was like kind of embarrassing, but they were all like, "Dude, you got to check out Michael Brecker." And after that, I remember going to the local record store every week, with whatever little money I could scrap up as a college student.
Hmm.
And I'd go through and I'd get a new Brecker album. And I would tear those up. I would just listen to them constantly and I'd
Hmm.
play along with them. But you're right, because I don't know, for me, I had the sound in my head first that I wanted. Like I wanted that Sanborn sound. I wanted that Brecker sound. And then it was like I found the mouthpiece and it just got me a few steps closer
Right, right.
to
But
this.
the important part was all those hours you spent listening to those guys, right?
Yeah, 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 exactly.
That's great, man. So
Well,
let's jump into sort of your educational approach. Um, do you have any like things that you sort of work on with every single student? Like, let's say I'm an intermediate jazz player and I come to you for lessons. Is everything in your approach based off of the way that the person plays, or are there things that you sort of work on with everybody? What's your approach to starting with a new student?
uh, that's a good question too. I mean, when I first started teaching, I thought I had to actually until probably the last couple of years. I thought I had to have a full what's the word, like the full process and the full path
Hmm.
all laid out, the perfect path to like being a jazz musician, becoming one. and
Right.
and I still to this day I get emails every week. I probably have hundreds of emails on my, in my email thing about Steve. I see all the lessons on your site and I see all the stuff. What's the perfect path? Can you outline the perfect path? And I think what people are asking is maybe they're asking the easy path. They don't always say that, but I think that from talking to people, I think that's what they're implying. Um, I don't know. For me, I have more of a like view that now that jazz education is more about filling the gaps,
Hmm.
because for me it was always filling the gaps. I had like a huge passion and I just learned whatever was in front of me at the time, and I had such a passion and like love, like it didn't even matter if I wasn't ready for diminished scales. I was like, whoa, what's a diminished scale? And I was trying to get it, I was busting my butt. And when I think of all the great jazz players and their paths, none of them came up through this, like, I don't know, that if you interviewed 100 of them,
Hmm.
Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Hank Mobley, all those guys, it's not like they all followed the same exact path.
Right.
They just had different paths. And I think the thing in common though is they all filled the gaps.
Right.
Like they had an incredible passion, and it was all about, they all had weaknesses, whether we can hear it or not. If you talk to them, they would be like, yeah, if they were on,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
even Brecker was like, yeah, I have weaknesses. And you would think, oh, he's so humble, but he was humble, but he had weaknesses. We all do. But I don't know. So when I sit down with a student, I'm just trying to fill the gaps. I'm like,
Right.
where are they at? What do they know? And then where's a good place to start? Let's fill some of these gaps. They might be a great player, but then they have a certain weakness in one area. I'll either hear it when they're soloing or when we're talking. I'll ask them a question. Um, the questions are the big thing. Like a lot of times, people on Skype, students will say, "Oh yeah, I know this." "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I know my diminished scales," and I'll be like, "Well, let me hear you play one starting on B flat, a whole half diminished scale," and then
Hmm.
they can't do it. I'm
Right.
like, "Okay, so you really don't know your diminished scales, you
Hmm.
know?"
So
Uh,
a lot of your sort of path comes from the initial interaction with the student, kind of seeing where they're at. I think that's kind of the way that every good teacher works, right? But would
yeah,
you say that the best students that you have, or in order to sort of make it, you got to have that underlying passion, right? Because there's only so much that a teacher can do for you, and then you got to kind of take that and run with it. It goes back to like the easy way out thing. Unfortunately, there's no easy way out in this music.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah, you have to have it's like a relentless passion. Like a lot of times I teach, the most frustrating thing to teach is overtones and altissimo. It's the thing that's like frustrated me the most as a teacher, because I'll say one thing to one student and bam, he's popping out altissimo notes,
Hmm.
and then the other student, it'll be like 3 months and they still can't get a high A, and I'm saying the same things. And the reason I bring up the relentless thing is I always tell students is it's like they say, how long is this going to take?
Right.
How long is it going to take to get the altissimo? How long is it going to take for me to master the bebop scales? And I always say it takes as long as it's going to take you to do it.
Right.
I mean, I was frustrated at Berkeley. I remember at Berkeley, this is another story, but I remember it being in a practice room, practicing this thing. I don't remember what it was, but
Hmm.
I'd been practicing it for maybe 100 hours. Like it was just this super hip line and all keys and some concept, and I was like, man, I'm making headway. This is incredible, and I just hours and hours. And this other guy, his name was Mike. He knocks on my door and he's like, "What are you playing, man? That sounds hip." He's like, "Play it for me," and I played it. And he's like, "Oh, that is cool." And he takes his sax and he just plays the line. And then he walks down the hall playing the line in different keys. And he
Wow.
turns around, he's like, "Steve, man, that's totally hip. I'm going to use this." And I was just like devastated. I'm like,
Right.
"What?"
Yeah, yeah, it's
Uh,
definitely everybody does that, learns at different rates, and some people have better ears than other people. But I think the nice thing is like you said, you had mentioned 100 hours of practicing this concept. If you put in the time, anybody can really do it. It's just all about committing and kind of going
yeah,
for it. Would you agree?
yeah, yeah, and being relentless. I mean, I have two students right now in Vermont that honestly have better ears than I ever
Mm-hmm.
had, or probably will have. I mean, one has perfect pitch. I just whatever I play or whatever I play on sax or on piano, he just hears it,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, oh man. And the other, I kind of wonder if he has perfect pitch. He says he doesn't, but man, he gets like any note I play on the piano, he knows what it is.
That's great. I have
Like
a student like
really,
that too. Freshman in higigh school is scary, scary good. It keeps me on my toes, actually.
yeah. And I was playing all these chords, and he named like he didn't name the root, but he knew it major, minor seventh, minor flat five, like altered. He knew all the like. I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like it just comes easier to some. I mean, but I was around those guys at Berkeley,
Hmm.
and my mindset then, it was frustrating, but back then I was like, okay, this is reality. It's easier for these guys, but that just means I have to, they're at parties, partying and doing whatever. I got to be practicing. Like I
Right,
got to be transcribing. I got to be, if I'm going to keep up with these guys, I got to do the extra work because that's just my reality.
right, exactly. I'm going to throw you a couple questions that I ask every single person that comes on the show. They're kind of
Okay.
little rapid fire, simple questions, but feel free to expand on them as much as you want. So, The first question is, what is one educational material that you couldn't live without? So this could be a book, anything that you use in your musical life that you feel like you couldn't live without.
You mean in the past or now?
Anytime. So like I had Jason Heath on as a guest, and he said the one thing that he couldn't live without would be like his smartphone or Evernote or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be
Uh,
just a book or something like that,
I mean, it's kind of a I don't know. It might be a lame answer, but for me, I think it's the recordings.
right?
Um,
I think that's the
yeah,
best answer we've gotten so far.
yeah, the recordings because I learned so much from them, but also that's what fuels my passion. Like if I didn't have those recordings, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't have this passion. And still to this day, man, I'm checking out new players. Like last night, I was laying in bed. My wife was in bed, and I'm like on my iPhone, like on Amazon. Like they signed up for something where you can just stream music,
Yeah,
and so I'm like looking for new players, like at 1 a.m. to listen to while I fall asleep.
that's great.
That gets me fired up, you know.
That's an awesome answer. I love that one. So the second one would be, who was the teacher that made the biggest impact on you and why?
Yeah, that's a good one too. Now I but the right answer part of me would want to say Jerry Bergonzi
Okay.
because Jerry was an amazing teacher and he just gave me all sorts of stuff. But there was this guy who taught my junior high school, Norm Wanzer.
Okay.
That was his name, Norm Wanzer. And I don't know. I think back to him and I'm like, that guy was huge, and he just had a passion for music. Like, I mean, he was an intense band director, and he was like going for perfection. And he had a jazz band that he was always pushing and giving like high school and college charts to. But the thing that just really hit me is every time I went in the music room, he'd be blasting music. Back then, it was like Spyro Gyra, Dave Sanborn. There was a band in upstate New York, Cabo Frio, and there's a trumpet band like Chase, I think it was
Yeah,
called.
Chase. Yep, my dad used
Yeah,
to listen to those records all the time.
yeah, Earth, Wind, and Fire. But he would be cranking it,
Mhm.
and so you'd walk in there and be like, "Whoa, what's this?" And he'd be so passionate about it. He's like, "Steve, check this out." And you get pulled into that, and then I'm passionate, and I'm like, "This sounds awesome," you know.
Yeah.
I think he had the biggest impact on me. And I studied with Charlie Banakis too, and he had a huge impact on me too. Because I don't know, I just he met me where I was at,
Hmm.
and it wasn't like he was just putting things out that to put out. He was like listening to where I was at, and he's like, "This is what you need to do." And at the time, I was like, "Wow, this is huge,"
Yeah,
you
and he
know.
had he had that incredible ability of just like he knew what you needed to work on to get you better very, very rapidly. And
Oh yeah.
that's probably why he had a 2-year waiting list for students.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, he when I went in there, it was very humbling because he did his ear training thing where he'd play a cadence
Right.
and then play a note.
Hmm.
And I'm a gigging musician, and I was playing, I don't know, 4 or 5 nights a week around Boston. And I went in there, and I he did it with me, and I could I got like half of them wrong. Like I
Right.
couldn't figure it. Like I was so embarrassed, and he's like, Steve, believe it or not, that's common. Like a
Right.
lot of people have never worked on this and can't do it. Um, but he was like totally, and for the next couple of weeks, I still had issues with it, even though I was practicing it.
Hmm.
And he after like the third week, he's like, you know what I want you to do? I want you to go home and I want you to do this exercise where you sing it.
Hmm.
He's like, some people they can't hear it until they sing it, so I
Hmm.
want you to do that. I practiced for 1 week singing it. I came back and I nailed it all.
Wow.
And I don't know, that was just huge because he came at it from a different direction and he helped me, you know?
That's
So,
awesome. Very cool. Well, shout out to Norm. It sounds like he made a really, really big impression on you. That's so
oh,
great.
yeah. He still emails. I'll send out my newsletter, and he'll email me some like funny quote or
Nice.
something about the newsletter. So
That's great. So
it's a
what
cool
is
guy.
this is kind of a strange question, I guess, and I kind of meant it to be that way. What is the one personal quality or characteristic that you feels makes somebody successful in music?
That's a good question. I think I don't know. For me, it's being sensitive or empathetic. That sounds a little strange, but I mean, you can be successful in music and be the biggest jerk.
Right.
I mean, some people are, but I don't know. For me, music is all about communicating,
Mhm.
and the best musicians know and listen to are in general great communicators. Like they listen, they feel for the other person, they're empathetic, they in real life too when you're talking and when they're playing, I think that thing comes out. Like when I'm playing and improvising, I'm not thinking all about me and impressing the audience or playing the hippest thing I just was practicing. I'm thinking about what did the keyboard player just play, or what's the drummer doing. I don't know. For me, when I hear a musician doing that, that's what I think that's the most valuable thing.
Mm.
It excites me because there's communication going on.
Right. And I've found that too in my years being in the music world is that unlike a lot of other areas of life, I feel like the bigger the name in jazz, the nicer the person is. And like you said, they just have fantastic communication skills. Um, and I got to hang out with a lot of the legendary jazz musicians when I went to University of New Hampshire, and I was always so nervous to meet them, and within 5 minutes, they made me feel like we'd been friends for our whole lives, and it was unbelievable.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I love that answer. I think empathy is a huge thing. All right, and one last question for you. What is the best musical purchase under or around $100 that you've made in the past year?
I mean, I like something I bought that was really cheap was iRealbook.
Yeah, fantastic. I always preach that on the podcast.
Um, I think that's the greatest thing. Like, and I use it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, what I've been doing is singing the bass notes,
Mm-hmm.
the chord, the chord roots, and like I'm learning tunes I don't know already, and the way I'm learning them is by like putting that on. Like I hike a lot up here in Vermont,
Mm-hmm.
so the other day I was hiking a mountain, going up, and I had iRealbook on, playing a tune, and I was just singing the bass notes. C, D, E, just whatever the bass notes were, um, singing it with it. And by the time, I got down the mountain, I'm like, knew that tune. I came home, picked up my sax, and I'm just wailing on the chord changes. So I just think it's the coolest thing. It's another one of those tools. I'm like, I wish I had that when I was a kid.
Right, right, exactly. Not that Abersalds aren't great, but just the ability to be able to slow stuff down, put it in any key, come up with your own exercises and program them into the app is just it's so great.
Oh yeah, and just having it on the move. I mean, I've played the play along on while I'm driving the car, and I'm like trying to scat a solo to it.
Hmm.
And to me, it's like I'm practicing without practice. Like I'm not really practicing, but I'm sort of practicing.
Right, your mind's still in the mode of let's learn something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the other thing that I've gotten a lot of recently is these Omni books, the new Omni books by Hal Leonard.
yeah.
I think those are awesome. I have they sent me the Stan Getz one, so I didn't pay for it. They sent it to me to review, but then I bought the Cannonball one, and I have the John Coltrane one, and
Cool.
I just think those are awesome. Like I hope they keep making those.
Right,
You know, I mean, the hard part today with students is there's so much information.
right.
So it's like I have a lot of students that are overwhelmed.
Hmm.
Or not. Sometimes they're not overwhelmed, but they're just jumping from thing to thing.
Right, and never really absorbing anything.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I would sit with one recording for like 3 months,
Right.
and I would figure out the whole solos. I would do all this stuff. Now I have students that come in every week, and every week they're on to a different thing.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what about that the transcription I gave you? Are you still, yeah, that's on the side. I'm working on this now. And
Hmm.
you know, so I
Yeah.
think that's the danger of too much information.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of the only disadvantage to the time that we live in, right? There's so much access to so many fantastic things, but it does make it easy to always be looking for the next best thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, nowadays it's like a lot of people are looking for the easy. Like I teach a lot of adult students on
Hmm.
Skype, and it's a very common question to ask. They always ask, "What's the easiest way?"
Right.
How, I'm whatever. I'm 50. What's the easiest way for me to become a jazz musician by the time I'm 60? You're always looking for the fastest route, the
Right.
shortcuts,
Hmm.
and it's a sobering question to answer because you're like, I can give you some tips and hints, but
Right.
then you got to do the work.
Exactly. Got to do the
Yeah,
work.
there's no way.
Awesome, man. Well, I just want to thank you so much again. What an awesome interview. I think you've probably given me years of stuff to think about just from a half hour of talking with you. So, really appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time to come and talk with us.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure.
All right, so there you have it, our interview with the great Steve Neff. A lot of stuff to think about from that interview. Some of that stuff that he was talking about, especially like, putting on the iReal Pro in the car or, trying to check out the latest people right before bed. I mean, that really goes above and beyond. That shows a true passion for what Steve is out there doing. And that's something we should all think about and strive to, in my opinion. I know I'm going to listen to that interview a lot of times to kind of try to hash out what Steve's talking about and try to incorporate a lot of that stuff into my own routine. So send me some questions that you might have or people that you would like to hear interviewed. I always like to get some suggestions from the people listening to this show on whose brain they would like me to pick next. I'm open to almost anybody, and I would love to start reaching out to some of these people that you guys are genuinely interested in hearing from. Could be any instrument. Obviously, I skew towards the saxophone side because I'm a saxophone player, but I'd love to hear some of your suggestions for people that you would like to hear on the show, and even some questions that you would like for me to ask them so that we can kind of do an interview by committee through myself. I think that would be a fantastic way to deliver more value to you guys. All right. So we'll see you on Friday with a regular episode. I hope everybody's having an awesome week, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a good one, everybody.